Let me close this, and I'm going to send this link to your team really quick because they wanted to share it as well. And then I have a bunch of things and questions that I jotted down.
Yeah.
But if there's anything that you want to talk about that comes to mind, you can always just say, "Hey, Jacob, I'd love to chat about this for a few minutes," and we'll just jump right into that. Okay. Well, unless you have any other questions, we'll just jump right in. Sound good to you?
Go for it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. My guest today is Don Tapscott. He's the co-founder and executive chairman at the Blockchain Research Institute, best-selling author of, I've lost count of how many books at this point, but the most recent one is Blockchain Revolution. Don, thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So I don't know if you remember, but you actually wrote the afterword, I think it was, to my first book that came out in 2012 called The Collaborative Organization.
Shocking.
Almost a decade ago. I have yeah, I have known you almost longer than I have known my wife.
I'm not even going to go there.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. And before we get into all the blockchain stuff, I'm really interested. How did you even get involved in the stuff that you are doing now? Building your own personal brand, running your own business. How did you get to all this?
Whoa. Well, I graduated as a psychologist in Edmonton, Alberta, and I moved to Toronto, and I had two job offers or openings. One was to be a school psychologist doing IQ testing on kids in the schools. And the second was to run a group at Canada's Bell Labs, trying to figure out how the internet would change the world. And I didn't get the school psychologist job. So this is 1979, we were doing controlled experiments where half of the company worked the way people worked back then with pens and pieces of paper and typing pools, the typewriters, and physical diaries and meetings and all the rest. And the other half had essentially, we created Microsoft Office for them in 1978, 79. And the group that had the technology that used the computer directly, and nobody used computers back then except programmers, performed better, and they worked differently. And the main thing is that they communicated differently. So we came to this radical conclusion that not only was everybody going to use a computer, but they'd become a communications and collaboration tool. And so I wrote a book based on that nobody read. And but I decided, let's do it. So I left the company, and I took my main collaborator, a woman named Dell Langdon, with me. Sorry.
It's all good.
It's probably a spam call too.
I love the spam calls. I get those 10 times a day. Well,
they're coming in fast and furious these days. Apparently, I'm about to go to jail and have my house expropriated because I didn't pay a parking ticket or something. But anyway, so but we decided, well, let's just do this. So we left the company, and we took a dozen people with us and created a company that was consulting on the internet. Easily a decade, almost 15 years before anyone had ever heard the word. We didn't use the word back then. It was the ARPANET. But and I've never looked back. Being an entrepreneur is a pretty awesome thing. And that was my first book. I wrote another book in the 80s that nobody read. And then I wrote my first bestseller, and that was Paradigm Shift in 92. And I wrote The Digital Economy, which was, they say, the first bestseller about the web and business in 94. And there have been a series of books, 16, some of which my mom came through for me, but many of them that are big books.
Yeah, Wikinomics, Macroeconomics, Blockchain Revolution. I remember that was I read many of those books. So it's been quite a fun journey.
I wrote the first big book about your generation
Oh, that's right. You did.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Growing Up Digital. That was 1997.
I remember. Yeah, that was one of the many books. Well, very cool. I mean, it sounds like you had a fascinating journey. And I got to ask, I know you, I'm sure I know the answer to this. You prefer working for yourself and creating your own businesses versus full-time employment for a company like so many people are today.
I sure do. There were two brief periods during that last, almost 40 years now, where I sold my company and I was working for another big company. And, I was a team player and I did my best to fit in, but it's not really something I enjoyed. And having a boss who referred to me as one of my people and who would tell me what to do. I don't know. It just it didn't that didn't work out so well, and I don't think it's because of me. I think it was the nature of organizations and how they function.
Yeah.
They were just quite stifling, really, and they they had incentives against innovation and change, and I've always been an entrepreneur. I was asked to describe once the best decision I ever made in my life, and I thought about it for a second. And professional decision, best personal decision was to marry the woman I married. But professional, it was to leave a company and to create my own company.
Yep. I totally agree. That was probably the best professional decision I've ever made as well. And I remember I was reading an article that you wrote for the Globe and Mail, or maybe you were interviewed for it, and it was your best advice for college graduates. And there were two things that really stuck out for me. One was you said, don't get a job, consider starting a business instead. And the second one that you said was always be a lifelong learner. And so I loved those pieces of advice. And a lot of people always ask me for the podcast, they say, you talk a lot about what's going on today, but what advice do you have for the younger generation? People who are just entering college or graduating college. But it seems like your best piece of advice is consider to start a business first before you go kind of down that full-time job path.
Well, I'm just recalling that article. And the article came out of a speech that I gave to the convocating class at Trent University. And, these convocation speeches are always full of motherhood.
Yes.
Real conventional wisdom, work hard, turn lemons into lemonade, what doesn't kill you will only make you stronger. So I started off joking about that, saying I have some more advice. Floss. You can't overestimate the importance of flossing, and don't ever show up to a job interview drunk.
That's good advice. It's very good advice.
A lot of ridiculous opportunity, but what I said is, there was a business graduating class, and I said to them, let me take 5 things that you're told that you should do and give you a counter argument. So, number 1, you're supposed to go out into the workforce now and get a job. And I said, well, there's always a role for working for somebody else. You can learn lots of stuff about project management, organizational politics, and so on. But consider being an entrepreneur. And I described that whole experience, actually, Bell Northern Research, and how it was a great choice for me. And there were some other things too, like don't have work-life balance. That's one of the things people always tell you.
Yep.
It said that paradigm is wrong. It sort of implies there's a period in your day where you work and a period in your day where you have a life. Or worse, there's a period in your existence when you work and then you retire and then you get to have a life if you don't have a stroke or something else. So I said, no, make work interesting. Do something you really enjoy and care about, so it's part of your life. And after work, give a damn. Don't just go out and go fishing or something, or just watch TV. Be consequential in your family and in your community and so on. So there were basically a whole bunch of sort of
Yeah.
things like that I tried to shake them up as being, just ideas that you might do differently.
Yep. And it was great advice. Great advice. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you've become so known for in the past few years, which is blockchain. And I know there's a lot of discussion around this, a lot of debate around this. But what if we start super high level?
Yeah.
How would you explain blockchain to a 10-year-old?
Okay. Well, just before I do that, let me finish up on the others, of the other things that I told them, and we can come back to that too. So I said, they all are graduates in management, right? I said, don't be a good manager, be a great leader. When things are stable, that's when you need good management. And of course, manage people well and so on.
Yeah.
But what we need today is not just good management, we need good leadership. And then I said, don't seek happiness. And then people looked at me like I was nuts. But, I find that happiness is a byproduct of living a principled and consequential life.
Yeah.
Do meaningful things, have meaningful relationships, love. It's like that old Buddhist thing. Have something to do that you care about. Have someone to love, and have something to look forward to. And I always find it so sad when people say, I'm doing my best to be happy. Happiness is a result of other things, and I said, and you're all hoping you're going to get lucky. Don't wish for luck. That for me, good fortune has always come about. It's sort of the intersection of preparation and opportunity. Get yourself prepared, and the opportunities will come along. And anyway, the other one that was quite controversial is they're all going out to create shareholder value. And I said, don't. Shareholders are one of a number of stakeholders. And the world that I'm leaving, that my generation is leaving, your generation, is a difficult one. It's a terrible one. It's too unjust. It's too conflicted. It's too unsustainable. And the problems, in many ways, are getting deeper. And, by all means, go out and be prosperous and make lots of money, but the world needs more from you. It needs you to step up. You're being called forth by history to do something very important and very extraordinary. And within the firm, or within whatever company you're creating or you're working for, don't just think about shareholders. You have other stakeholders. Focus on your customers. Focus on your employees. Focus on the communities within which you operate. And care about the world, because business can't succeed in a world that's failing. So I think they were all kind of shocked when I gave them that advice. But anyway,
it's good advice. It's good advice.
You hire me to give a speech to young people. Actually, I wasn't paid. I was my closing address as the chancellor of the university. I'd been chancellor there for 6 years, so I thought I'd go out, guns blazing.
Go out with a bang. I like it. Yeah. No. I think that's nice.
Blockchain.
Yes. How would you explain it to a 10-year-old?
You know about the internet?
I do. Yeah.
You don't look 10. Okay. You know about the internet? It's about information, right? But now we have an internet that's about things, money, music, art, votes, things that really matter in society, assets. And now we can move and manage all that stuff around just like we do information.
Simple explanation.
Well, it had to be brief, didn't it?
Yes. So how does it work? Because I know that even I get asked this question a lot. Like, what's the practical aspect of how blockchain would work? Or do you have an example something that just anybody can relate to and understand as far as the impact that blockchain might have?
Well, yeah, at the Blockchain Research Institute, we're studying hundreds of cases and stories, looking at 15 different industries. And we can, I mean, if everyone who's listening to this podcast wants to go for it, we can go for a few days right now, just like make a Guinness Book of Records or something like that. But let me, beyond a 10-year-old, describe what this thing is.
Yeah.
So when I joined Bell Northern Research in 78, we were dealing with the ARPANET, but it was really kind of became the internet, and it was about information. But even today, if I send you some information, a PDF, a PowerPoint, an email, I'm actually sending you a copy. I'm not sending you the information.
Yep.
And that works great for information. But when it comes to assets, oh, geez, I got to turn this stupid thing
You're
on.
a popular guy.
It's just fishers trying to get me to do something really bad. When it comes to assets, things that really matter in the economy, like money or security, stocks, bonds, things like contracts, deeds, the data in our identities, intellectual property, carbon credits, synthetic natural assets like that. It could be art or music or a vote. Vote's an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. Copying those things is not a good idea. You don't want someone copying your identity or your vote. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money. Now, cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for a long time. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through intermediaries, banks, stock exchanges, transfer agents, brokers, credit card companies, governments, social media companies. They perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify that you are who you are. They identify the asset. They clear and settle all the transactions and communications, and they keep records. And overall, they do a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. And we document these in Blockchain Revolution, the book, extensively. So, I mean, they're all being hacked. The two kinds of big computer systems, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked.
Yeah.
And but there are other problems too. The 2 billion people are kept out of the global financial market. They take too long. Why does it take 7 days to send money from one country to another?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And why are you charged 10% by Western Union? Ever heard of cross-border email payments? So that's where blockchain comes in. So what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value, some kind of vast global distributed ledger where anything of value, from money, securities, all the stuff that I mentioned, could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way? Mm-hmm. And that's where Bitcoin comes in, because it started there. It doesn't end there. But in 2008, this anonymous person named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper where he solved this double spend problem that had been beguiling cryptographers for decades. And for the first time ever, people could do transactions peer-to-peer. And that set off a set of sparks that's lighting a prairie fire, meaning that it's not about Bitcoin, although Bitcoin's amazing just because it works. But the underlying technology, for the first time ever, people can trust each other and trust to do all this stuff. And trust is not achieved by an intermediary. It's achieved by cryptography and collaboration and some very clever code. So what are the examples? I mean, pick an industry. In my TED Talk, I gave a number on blockchain. I did another TED Talk earlier. I talked about something like remittances. There's $1 trillion that moves around the world. People have left their ancestral lands. It's the global diaspora, and they send money back home. They get charged too much. It takes too long. Now you can do that immediately. you know, 80% of the land titles in India, 70% in the rest of the developing world are not enforceable. So you're in Honduras, some dictator comes to power. He says, you know, you may have a piece of paper that says you own your farm, but the government computer says you don't own your farm. My friend owns your farm. So, and this happened on a mass basis. So you put land titles on a blockchain, and nobody can mess with that. So, I mean, those would be two of many, many examples. But wherever you are in the economy, whatever industry you're in, whatever hat you're on, there's an opportunity for this Internet of Value to make things better.
So you say internet of value. So I understand for something that has kind of like an agreed upon value, like something that you're selling, something that you're buying. What about something that maybe has an intangible value, like an idea, a song, something that you create that doesn't necessarily have a monetary value yet? How does blockchain kind of fit into that?
Value is, and price, of course, is determined. It's a relationship between a buyer and a seller, and buyers and sellers have different ways of discovering price. But in the case of music, typically a creator of the music, the seller of the music, will assign a value to it. So, you know, Apple says this MP3 is worth such and such, or Spotify says you pay us this amount monthly and we'll stream this stuff to you. But it's a really good example, because think about what the Internet of Information did to that asset, a song. If you were, because it broke our intellectual property regime and it destroyed the value. So if you were a songwriter 35 years ago, you wrote a platinum song, 1 million a million singles, you get $46,000 in royalties. Today, 1 million streams will get you $35.
Wow. Like that's an actual.
Yeah. We did this research for the book. So what if there were an Internet of Value? See, the basic problem is that we treated that asset, something of value, as if it were information. We just copied it, right? We all did this. Everybody listening or watching, we send in MP3 files around to people. And the end result was this is very damaging to the songwriters and to the real creators of art. So imagine if you could post your song. And Imogen Heap, the British singer-songwriter, Grammy winner's already done this. She posts a song on this blockchain platform. And the song is inside something called a smart contract. And the smart contract protects her intellectual property rights and governs the sale or use of the song. So if you want to listen to the song, it's free. You want to put the song in your movie, and the song says to the movie producer, oh, what do you want to do? Background music? You're going to have somebody sing it. It's going to be the theme song. And the way she describes it is, my song acts as a business, protecting my intellectual property rights and protecting the value that I created. So that's a perfect example of how blockchain can move us towards a world where the real creators of value are fairly compensated for that value.
Interesting. Okay, so what then happens to all the intermediaries? Because like you said, right now there's always kind of a middleman that goes between the buyer or the seller or the person sharing the idea, the person receiving it. So if that can just be done directly, peer-to-peer, what's the impact for those intermediaries? They just disappear?
Well, Alex Tapscott, my co-author, is also my son. We do not say the intermediaries are going to be wiped out. But the value in the middle will change. And there's this thing called disintermediation. And in 1994, in the digital economy, I wrote about this. I said, if you're in the middle, you got to rethink your value. If you're in the information industry, like say you're a bookseller. And I said, but it doesn't mean you'll be wiped out. It means that you need to re-intermediate. There's the creation of new value in the middle. And back then I said, I think the opportunity to create new value may be bigger than the old disintermediation. And that, of course, was true. I mean, look at it. Barnes and Noble suffered, but look at Amazon. It's the most valuable company in the world now. It's in the middle, right in that space. So I said the problem is the leaders of the old middle are not typically the ones to create the new middles. So what happens to these people? Well, we're of the view the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. It depends on what they do. And traditional people in the middle, like say Western Union, I wouldn't think that they have a huge chance. I don't know the company very well, but I don't see a lot of signs that they're trying to innovate a whole new model for remittances globally using this technology. So it's really up to you.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. So when we think of the future of work, because that's a lot of what I spend time exploring. I mean, the podcast, the Future of Work podcast. When you think about blockchain and how this might impact work or business, does this have the potential to impact sort of the listeners, the viewers of this kind of on a day-to-day, or would we not even know that this is happening and it's just kind of in the background?
No, I think it affects people very profoundly, more so than the Internet of Information. But it's playing out very differently. Like back in the day, anyone who was around in 1995 and old enough to sort of log on to something, all of a sudden we had this thing called the World Wide Web where you could pull up information. That was tough. It took a long time for a web page to load on a screen, and it didn't do much. I remember, when the web came out, I ran upstairs and I grabbed my kids and I said, "This is it. It's happening. Look, there's a browser now. It's called Mosaic, and you can go and access all the information in the world." And so I pulled up Mr. Potato Head. It took me about 10 minutes to do this, and I showed it to 8-year-old Alex, or however old he was. And he kind of looked at it and it's like, "But what do you do with Mr. Potato Head, Dad?" I mean, it's just, he wasn't that impressed. Now over time it evolved, and anybody could put up a website, and all of a sudden you as an end user were doing stuff. You were using the first app of the Internet of Information, email. And then after that, it became texting, just like the first app of the Internet of Value was Bitcoin. But the way this is happening is we're messing with very big, deep structural things here, like how the financial system works, like how corporations can orchestrate capability to create value, like what happens in a supply chain. So it's going to take a while for the end user stuff to really kick in. But if you're a Filipino housekeeper in New York and you're sending your money to your mom, that's a really big deal for you as a person. If you're a musician who doesn't get fairly compensated for your work, that would be a really big thing as well.
So it sounds like the impact then will start in certain areas and then kind of evolve and grow into maybe more, I don't know if you would call it more established businesses, but kind of mainstream work, so to speak.
Yes and no, because I mean, you look at something like Libra, that if Facebook can pull that off, a global currency for anyone using Facebook, that's a big if, but if they could, you have 2.5 billion people that all of a sudden, or let's say 1/10 of those started using it. This is by far the biggest retail bank in the world. And Western Union's remittances business will be in big trouble if that occurs. So I would think so. And that's something that's a very personal kind of thing. You would bring hundreds of millions of people into the global financial system almost overnight. That could be the biggest boon to eliminating poverty since electrification. Now, should corporations be the ones that are delivering a new global currency? Well, that's a good debate to have. And nation states are now getting into it too. China being the first one out, creating their own fiat currency will be a cryptocurrency for the whole country. And then the plan there is to move into Africa, probably move into Africa and start to expand it around the world. And it becomes the currency of record to replace the US dollar. So there's a lot of big stuff, but this is stuff that affects people. That's at the heart of the whole financial system. It's not like it's going from the little stuff, in the edges into the core. Blockchain starts in the core in a lot of ways. Reliance Industry in India has 300 million customers on its Geo mobile platform. Their CEO there, Mukesh Ambani, wants to roll out blockchain as a platform to all of those people, bringing them into the financial system.
Wow.
So people who say, well, there's not much going on, or I don't see anything, they're not looking very deep, because this is really big stuff. I mean, it's one thing to have access to information if you're a super poor person in India. It's another thing to have the ability to do transactions and to borrow and to buy things and to have your land title protected. This is way more material than being able to see the equivalent of Mr. Potato Head on the screen.
I was just going to ask you about that, because I've interviewed probably over 300 guests now on this show, and various backgrounds, some chief digital officers, CTOs, and I get mixed things when I ask them about blockchain. I get some who say that they are excited about it and they're starting to see some potential implications. And I get others, and these are, chief digital officers of big companies, who say that it's still too early and they don't see the impact yet, and they're kind of not sure. And it's more of those things that they're waiting for. But it sounds like they're just not going deep enough into the implications of what it might have.
Well, there's some truth to it, in the sense that the technology still is relatively immature. Blockchains don't interact together. If you can't replace Visa yet, because the scalability, the throughput, transaction speed is not quite there. User interfaces are still pretty terrible. But there are all kinds of other big impediments that are making this thing move slowly. It's not just the old law that we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. It's something much bigger than that. That with the Internet of Information, you are messing around with the information industries, which are important: newspapers, books, television, stuff like that. And eventually that kind of trickled into some other industries, like, say, retail. But with the Internet of Value, you're disrupting very fundamental things about how the economy works: money, the whole financial system, the nature of the corporation. And this is going to take a while. But I think that people who say this is taking a while are right. People who say this is not important technology are making a terrible mistake, because I've been at this now for 4 decades, and I may be wrong, but I'm convinced that the cluster of technologies around blockchain are the most profound technologies, more so maybe than AI and machine learning, in terms of their impact on the economy and on the way that things work, the way that society works as well.
So since we're streaming this live, I'm actually getting a couple of questions that are coming in as well. And here's actually a good question for you from David McGrath. And he says, Bitcoin and blockchain is 11 years old now. Don, what do you see in the next 10 years?
Well, the first thing, compared to the Internet of Information, 11 years old would put us into what? 1988?
Yep.
7 years before the web, 15 years before Google, 19 years before Facebook and social media. So, but I'm not assuming that was a pejorative preamble to the statement. It's a great question, and I'm not a futurist. I don't talk about this is exactly what's going to happen in the future. I think the future is something to be achieved. But if you look around today and you see the way that blockchain is having an early impact, I think that in the financial services industry where it started, it's already disrupting the way that we raise money. Venture capital is, I don't know, maybe 100 billion dollars around the world. That almost half of that over the last few years, almost half that amount has been raised in blockchain-based crowdfunding events, badly labeled ICOs, initial coin offerings. It's a bad label because you're selling a token. It's not always a coin. It can be all kinds of different assets. In financial services, trade finance. We have trains, boats, and planes, and trucks, and borders, and escrow agents, and tax authorities, and transfer agents, and all this different stuff moving around. They're sending faxes and emails and phoning each other up, and meeting and having accessing primitive computer systems. Imagine all of that on a shared network state, where real time you can see what happens, where there's no 3-day settlement period for things because the payment and the settlement is the same activity. It's just a change to the ledger where you have a single version of the truth. So trade finance all around the world is moving to blockchain. And there are a number of other big changes that are going on in that industry, but that's one of 20 industries in society. I think supply chains is a big one. Blockchain that's a $50 trillion industry for the same reasons. FedEx says they're going to rebuild the logistics industry around this technology.
Wow.
And they're partnering with DHL and UPS, their fiercest competitors. An exec at FedEx says to me, blockchain's a team sport. It's not like the old days. FedEx, you build a great network, you stick your logo on it, and you roll it out to the world. He says, we're not changing the entire industry. We need everybody in the industry, including our competitors, to cooperate. So a really big one that I'm so excited about is the idea of our identities. And normally people think, well, about identification. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the tip of the iceberg. That you think about it, the virtual you. The virtual Jacob knows more about Jacob than you do.
That is very true.
You can't remember what you bought a year ago or said a year ago, or what your heart rate was a year ago, or what medication.
Black Mirror episode, Don, you're freaking me out.
Well, and I mentioned 4 categories of data of the dozens or hundreds.
Yeah.
So the way that Alex and I talk about it is that we sort of have this digital feudalism. Anyone who listens and took history, European history, all around the world before capitalism, pretty much in most countries, there was feudalism. You weren't paid a wage by a company. Companies didn't exist in the same way. You were tied to the land. It was all about the landowners. And you had a plot of land and you created some value, some produce. The landlord took most of it away, but you got to keep some of it. Well, today, the new asset class is data. And Jacob, you create all this data, but it's taken away from you and you get to keep a few cabbages. So that means that you can't use this data to plan your life. You can't monetize the data, and it's a handful of small companies who are doing that. It means that it's not secure. It's going to get hacked, probably. And your privacy is being undermined. And people say to me, well, Don, privacy's dead, get over it. I think that's foolishness. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. And we need to get our identities back so that we can manage them responsibly for ourselves. And if you look into this, the kind of data that corporations have on us now that are being aggregated together, There is actually the virtual you is a thing. The virtual Jacob is a thing out there. And if I pay the right amount of money, I can go and I can learn all about you. So, well, that's not a problem, right? Because corporations can deliver better service to us. Well, sure, that's true. And corporations do have a legitimate interest in accessing this data. But I don't know. What's it like for a company or companies to have perfect information about us? Do we ever do things that are not in our interest because companies convinced us to do so? So that's kind of a long preamble to the bottom line, which is that we can now, with blockchain, have a self-sovereign identity. It's in a black box. We own it. It sweeps up all this transactional data. It's capturing your heart rate and all the rest of this stuff. You own it. You manage it for yourself. So you just got an X-ray. That radiology report is yours. It's in your identity, and you can get another opinion or anonymize it and give it to science, or anonymize it and sell it, or do whatever you like. It's not science fiction. This is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is scary. I mean, nobody ever reads the terms of service when they log into Netflix or buy something on Amazon or use iTunes or Spotify. But the amount of data that we give away whenever we use these platforms is just staggering.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier, it's sort of like you don't really have a choice. If you want the convenience of Netflix, the convenience of iTunes, of Amazon, then it's like you gotta give it to them. So
well, it does raise a big issue about how we get there.
Yeah.
And again, it gets back to your question about disintermediation and reintermediation. I think we're going to see some of these companies, and I certainly argue it to them, that will be more enlightened and will think, there's a legitimate consumer and social interest here, that we, as a good principled company that cares about our customers and about the world within which we operate. And we're going to migrate towards a new model where customers have more access, control, and even ownership of their data. But we're going to do that in a way that we can benefit too. Because when they succeed, there's a way that we can succeed too. And big data is not going to go away. It's going to be tiny data that we're going to have access to. Now, we might have to pay a little bit for it, but that'll be a good investment on our part, and this data is going to be better because it's going to be authenticated in all kinds of ways that we can authenticate data today. If someone says they got a B+ on their biology 7th lab, we'll know that because on this identity, it will be revealed that that was attested to by this person at this biology professor at that university. So data can be better and bigger in this new environment. How we get there, this is a long, complicated story, but I think it's a goal worth fighting for.
Would it get that granular? Because when you thought about, for example, or when you mentioned the biology test, I was thinking, can it be also used as a way to evaluate leaders inside of organizations or an employee when they get a performance review? Like, does blockchain have implications in the world of talent and leadership and how we evaluate talent inside of companies?
Sure. Well, if you have a self-sovereign identity, all your employee and performance data goes into that too. Now, it's up to you what you want to reveal to your employer. And chances are, if you want to get ahead, you're going to reveal lots if you're a good person.
Yeah.
And so what you are prepared to reveal may in part become a determinant of your success within, at least your mobility within a workforce. I mean, these are all tough issues, and I always like to put them in one of two boxes. Box number one, reason why this is a bad idea and we shouldn't do it. And then box number two, we call implementation challenges, things to be managed in this new environment.
No, that makes sense. And then how does the world of AI fit within this? Because I remember, I think it was either in a talk that you gave or in an article that you were featured in, you were talking about there's going to be a lot of implications of AI. Economies will be disrupted. Massive areas will see job loss. do you think we're going to see more of a negative impact from AI or a positive kind of optimistic impact from AI?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define negative.
It's true.
It's negative if someone loses their job and they don't have something else to do. It's positive if we wipe out entire sectors of the economy and have a new social contract that frees up those people to do things which are even more important, because there are lots of things to be done. So, but you combine blockchain and AI. This is pretty strong stuff. So you think about well, first of all, AI is going to be distributed. It's not going to run on some giant supercomputer. These are going to be autonomous agents moving around on blockchains, buying and selling things and learning and reprogramming themselves to do things that they didn't previously know how to do. And it could be something really simple, like letting that light bulb purchase some power from a distributed power source, and then reestablishing the reputation of the light bulb as a trustworthy device because it pays for the power that it buys. Something as trivial as that to something then in an operating theater that's realizing that something needs to be done here. It's not being done, and it goes and does a transaction and purchases a certain medication or something to save somebody's life. But you combine smart contracts with these autonomous agents, and well, in blockchain revolution, we hypothesized that you could eventually have a company that had no management, no CEO,
Yep.
and no people. And we call it a decentralized autonomous organization. It's a bunch of these things moving around on blockchains doing stuff. We almost didn't publish it because it was so futuristic. But we did. And then the week after the book came out, this something was launched called a decentralized autonomous organization, and it was a venture capital company.
I remember reading that. Wasn't it in Japan or Hong Kong?
No. Well, it was kind of all over the place, but in the U.S. But it was a company with no people, and it raised $164 million.
Wow!
By conducting a crowdfunding campaign, and then it went about its business, creating value. Now, it's not a totally happy ending because there was a coding error in one of the smart contract facilities, and the creators of this thing decided to give the money back. But the fact that this could exist, Bob Dylan, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. So you extrapolate that out to the level of the society, and top 48, 50 states in the US, the number one job type is truck driver. And then that's gone, not in a century, in a decade, I think, most of it. Number one job type for women is cashier. Been to a drugstore recently, or a supermarket. Yeah. So I've written a lot about this, and if anyone's interested, they can just Google my name and the new social contract. I called it a declaration of interdependence. And you can actually go there, and I drafted, here are the big disruptions, and here's what we're going to have to do to fix these problems.
It seems like blockchain more recently is getting a lot more attention than it has in the past. Are there specific trends that are really forcing organizations and leaders to take blockchain more seriously now than 3 years ago, 5 years ago?
Well, it's sort of cyclical, or it's up and down. I mean, for the first few years, it was a real slow burn up. And then what happened was the whole opportunity to invest in crypto took off, and the crypto tail wagged the blockchain dog for a while. Then in 2008, in January, the crypto market crashed. And the next 2 years, you saw various pundits and people saying, well, that was a big scam, or that was nothing. But then crypto came back. And more important, we started to see these early implementations of blockchain, which, by the way, can involve crypto. Crypto is not just about Bitcoin. It's about any digital asset. This is the biggest transformation of assets from physical to digital ever. So, and right now it's back. And then the big thing that's bumped it up, of course, is first Libra from Facebook.
Yeah, that was huge. That was huge news.
And then that accelerated the plans of the government in China to roll out its CBDC, central bank digital currency. And then the Fed started wondering, oh my God, they're on the way to becoming the central, the currency of record in the world, replacing the US dollar. And then you have the head of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, saying we should replace the US dollar. We need to bring all these digital currencies, once they roll out together, into what he called a global hegemonic synthetic currency. It's a mouthful, but this is basically what Keynes was arguing at Bretton Woods in 1944, a global currency. So weirdly, the sort of currency issue, not Bitcoin, but corporate currencies and then state-based or fiat currencies, is a big driver causing a lot of people to look at this thing again. And, and then we're getting really good research now too. We've created or are creating 300 research deliverables at the Blockchain Research Institute. And before we go, I should mention that we've also developed 4 full online courses through Coursera. And this is in partnership with INSEAD, which I see I happen to be wearing. This is not intentional, but I'm wearing my INSEAD.
I see it. It's a good looking vest you got on there.
This is not an INSEAD branded thing, by the way. I was just cold here in my apartment. But yeah, it took us almost $1 million to build these courses, 250 videos,
wow,
250 quizzes. And the final course is a practicum where you need to figure out a use case in your industry. So if you go to INSEAD and you ask for blockchain in the enterprise, or just Google my name and Coursera. Did I say go to INSEAD? I mean, go to Coursera, and you can find it. And it's it's free to take the whole first part of it. It's not expensive, like $79 or something. So anyway, there's stuff like that. I mean, my TED Talk, it's like many millions of people, and there are all kinds of things that these things take time. But what you get is this thing which we could describe as uneven, but then combined development, where things just start to take off. And, I could be wrong, but I sense a very strong head of steam penetrating many industries on this topic.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, maybe last two pieces of advice that maybe you can offer people. So the first would be advice that you have for non-leaders of organizations, just for kind of the average person like me, like people listening. What should we be doing about blockchain, if anything? And the second piece of advice would be specifically for leaders of organizations who have the decision-making power, the budget. What should they be doing about blockchain, if anything?
Okay, well, if you're a consumer, you're wearing a consumer hat or a parent hat or an entrepreneur hat or a citizen hat, you care about society. There are lots of different hats that we all wear. If this is right, what I'm saying, that we're getting something that's bigger than the internet emerging here, then that's a really big deal. And I always find there are 2 kinds of people, whether in a mahogany row in a boardroom or whether it's just somebody I run into. And this is a bit arbitrary, but there are people who are curious and those who aren't. Wow, Tapscott, he's called most of the really big ones over 4 decades, and he thinks it's really a big deal. It's going to affect everything and everybody. Maybe he's right. I think I'll check it out, try and learn some more. And that's the very first thing that you can do. Check it out. And the more you check out, you read a book, you watch.
Yeah, watch your TED Talk. That was a great primer. I mean, I've watched it.
Yeah. And it's the power of TED. Every day I run into people who say, this is my whole world now, and it's because I watch that talk. But or take the course, and then all kinds of opportunities are going to open up for you, because when you start to get curious and learn about this stuff, there's just so many different angles and interests, whether you care about improving things in society or making money as an entrepreneur, whatever. So if you run a big corporation, it doesn't matter what function you're in. Say, well, the CEO, it's obvious. CEO, they set the corporate culture by their own behavior, whether they intend to or not. Are you going to show some curiosity around this thing, and start to put in place the resources so that you can make sure that you don't get wiped out, and that you do the right thing, and that you can re-intermediate? CFO, the financial person, it's called triple entry accounting. For 350 years, we've had a debit and a credit. Soon there'll be a third entry on a blockchain, which is like a real-time audit. So you won't need an audit at the end of the year, not the way that we used to, because you can do an audit at 2 this afternoon. So, and in government, you won't have an auditor general come in and say, we found a really big problem from 9 months ago. It's going to be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, there's a problem. We've got to fix that. So, but the CMO blockchain is beginning to have a really interesting set of opportunities around the branding and around knowing the provenance of things. You look at something like you're in the food industry and the food chain. You can know the provenance of an avocado. Big Walmart is using blockchain for produce like that, or a fish. A quarter of the fish you eat is
so where it comes from, like who's touched your product.
Well, for starters, a fish, a quarter of them are not labeled accurately. They're cheap fish labeled as expensive fish, or endangered fish labeled as okay fish. So you can know what your fish actually is, but also how old it really is and what it ate, and if it was farm, what medication it had, and what temperature it was as it moved along the food chain, and so on. So if you're in marketing or in supply chains, big opportunities there. We've done a lot of work on what blockchain means for CIO and IT people, and there are many, many implications there. So HR, I'm actually doing a big talk. I can't wait. It's called Rethinking Work for the Second Era of the Digital Age. It's going to be in Miami. It's a big conference, and it comes up early in the year, February, March of next year, and I'm quite looking forward to that. And because what does it mean to have an identity where all this data about you actually own it, and you can make decisions about it? That's a very powerful thing. And many of the things that we dreamed about when I wrote Wikonomics, which is really about mass collaboration, those ideas were in part waiting for technology that can enable those ideas to take hold in reality.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. Well, we're pretty much near the end of our time, but somebody was asking, they saw the guitars in the background, so I have to ask you this question. And they said, what is your favorite song to play and why?
Right now, I have a granddaughter, and over at my daughter's house, I have a ukulele, and her favorite song that I play for her is, "Hey, good looking, what you got cooking?" Why don't you cook up something with me? But I'm in a band, obviously. This is
Men in Suits.
Yeah, the name of the band is Men in Suits, and this is sort of I got a pretty good setup here at home where you can't really see it, but there's keyboards over there and stuff.
All sorts of craziness going on over there.
But the song is called Morning Light, and you can just get it for free. It's at meninsuitsmusic.com. Men in Suits Music.
And very last question, I wanted to congratulate you. I heard you had 2 grandchildren from 2 different kids born within 12 hours of each other, which I don't think I've ever heard of anything like that. So that's quite an amazing.
Yeah, it was in the same city in different hospitals.
Wow.
The eldest, I'm sure, will reign over the 11-year-old younger cousin for a long time. My little cousin, stuff like that's what'll go down there.
I'm sure. Well, I have a 3-year-old, so I'm just getting learning the ropes, so to speak. But I just wanted to give you a big congratulations because that's very, very exciting.
Well, it's a great thing, and they say that being a grandparent is awesome because you can walk away, but that's not it. It hasn't, for me at least. When you're a young parent, Jacob, you know this. You're just trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
You're sleep deprived. Every minute with your kid is trying to get them to do something or to go somewhere, or you're trying to teach them stuff. And whereas with a grandparent, pure joy, just hang out. I built those two kids are 7 months, but there's 18 months older. I have a granddaughter, and she and I built a Lego train she's 2. We built a Lego train. It took us an hour.
Wow.
And, the stuff that we had on that train, it had a long column with a birthday cake on the top, and she found a candle that went on the birthday cake. I mean, what a joyous experience.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to go anywhere. She had nothing to do. We just chilling.
Well, I love that with all the stuff that you have going on, with all the travel, with all the speaking, you still make time for the family stuff. So I think that's something we all can do a better job of. Where can people go to learn more about you? Anything that you want to mention? You mentioned your course on Coursera. You have the Blockchain Research Institute. Anything that you want to mention for people to check out, please feel free to do so. Any URLs or products you want to throw out there?
Well, Google my name, Don Tapscott, and TED, and that talk will come up. Blockchain Revolution, if you're going to get the new edition. In North America, it's a paperback with a yellow band across the top because we've updated it, and it's got 25,000 new words. Take the course. You'll be a world leader if you can. You can do it on the side easily over 2 or 3 months, and it's almost free. It costs almost nothing. And if you're with a big company or early stage company in this space, think about getting your company to join the Blockchain Research Institute. That's blockchainresearchinstitute.org. And we're doing like $10 million worth of work in this area, exploring stuff. And the other thing is April 7th and 8th, we're holding a huge event in Toronto. Last year we had 150 speakers. It was Imogen Heap, British singer-songwriter I mentioned, performed at it. And it's called Blockchain Revolution Global. And if you go there, Blockchain Revolution Global, April 7th, 8th in Toronto, you'll see the whole deal on that too. And tickets right now are massively discounted, and they will be for another few days, I think.
Very cool. Well, Don, I know you're super busy, so I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to speak with me. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I hope everybody both watching and listening to the podcast when it goes live learned a lot as well. And make sure to check out Don's site, the course, the book, and the TED Talk. He's super easy to find. So Don, thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks, Jacob. So long.
All right.